My fiancée hid my passport to sabotage my career, but when I confronted her, she destroyed it. Now she's viral for all the wrong reasons, and the court exposed her completely. I'm 29 years old. I work in administration, and about 6 months ago, something happened to me that I still can't quite believe when I think about it. My ex-fiancée, Jessica, basically tried to sabotage my career because she couldn't stand me going away on a work trip, and what she did was so extreme that it ended up being one of those cases people share on social media as an example of what not to do in a relationship. But let me start from the beginning. Because the thing is, I didn't see the signs until it was too late. Jessica and I had been together for like 3 years when all this happened. We'd been engaged for about 8 months, and honestly, I thought we were a solid couple. You know, the kind that supports each other and wants the best for one another. She worked as a freelance graphic designer from home, and I had a pretty stable job at a mid-sized company in the city. Nothing spectacular, but it paid well, and there were growth opportunities. We lived together in the apartment that was technically more mine than hers because I'd rented it before we started living together, but she'd brought her stuff, and it was basically our home. Everything seemed to be going well. We were planning the wedding for the following year, talking about eventually buying a house. All that serious couple stuff when you're going serious. The thing is that at my job, I'd always been one of those people who stayed in the office, doing my work day by day without much drama, but I was good at what I did and my boss knew it. So one day, I think it was in March or maybe early April, my boss calls me into his office and tells me the company is expanding international operations and they need reliable people to make regular business trips, like once or twice a month, to meet with potential clients and establish business relationships in other countries. He told me he'd thought of me because he knew I was responsible and could represent the company well, and that obviously it would come with a considerable salary increase, like 40% more than what I was making, plus all expenses paid and frequent flyer points and all that. I mean, it was an incredible opportunity. You know what I mean? Not just because of the money, which we definitely need for the wedding and the house we wanted to buy, but because it was the kind of opportunity that could completely change my career. I wouldn't just be another administrative worker anymore. I'd be someone the company trusted for important things, someone with a real future in the company. I was super excited when I got home that day. I practically ran from the parking lot to the apartment to tell Jessica, thinking she'd be just as excited as I was. When I told her, her reaction was weird from the start, but I didn't see it at the time, or maybe I didn't want to see it. She said something like, "Oh, that's great, honey. That sounds awesome." But her tone was like flat. You know, like when someone says the right words but doesn't really feel them. I asked her what was wrong and she told me nothing, that she was just tired from a project she had, so I didn't think much of it. The next few days, I started doing the paperwork to accept the position. I had to sign new papers, attend orientation meetings, all that corporate stuff. Jessica kept acting normal, or so I thought, although looking back there were little things I should have noticed. Like a week after I accepted the position, my boss gave me the details of the first trip. I had to go to Germany and the Netherlands for 10 days to meet with potential clients in Frankfurt and Amsterdam. It was the perfect trip to start because I was going with another more experienced executive who was going to show me how everything worked. Basically, it was paid training in Europe. The date was set for about a month later, so I had time to prepare, renew my passport if necessary, though mine still had like 2 years validity, buy appropriate clothes for the meetings, all that stuff. When I told Jessica the specific details, that's when things started getting really weird. She said 10 days? Are you seriously going to be gone 10 days? And I was like, yeah, but it's for work. It's not like I'm going on vacation without you. It's literally my job. She said she understood, but that it seemed like a long time, that we'd never been apart that long since we'd been living together. Which was technically true, but I mean, 10 days isn't the end of the world, right? Plus, we could talk by video call every day. It wasn't like I was going to disappear from the planet. But Jessica started making comments more and more often about the trip. At first, they were subtle, passive-aggressive comments, like, "Oh, great that your job is more important than spending time with me." Or things like, "I'm sure you'll be so busy you won't even have time to call me." I tried to reassure her. I told her that obviously I was going to call her, that I was going to miss her, but that this was important for our future, to be able to have the wedding we wanted and the house and all that. She'd say yes. That she understood, but her comments didn't stop. As the trip date got closer, Jessica got worse. She started making scenes about little things that had nothing to do with the trip, like if I didn't wash the dishes immediately after eating, or if I stayed working late preparing for the presentations I had to do in Europe. Once, like 2 weeks before the trip, I asked her if she could help me review a PowerPoint presentation, and she literally said, "What for? If your job is more important than me anyway." I was like, "What? Where did that come from?" I tried to talk to her, ask her what was really going on, but she just said nothing, that everything was fine, but clearly it wasn't. My best friend Blake, who's known Jessica since we started dating, told me one day when we were having some beers that he noticed Jessica was acting weird, like needier for attention than normal. Blake had never been Jessica's biggest fan, not because she was a bad person, but because he said she always needed to be the center of attention in any situation. But I always thought he was exaggerating. Now I realize maybe he was right from the beginning. The last week before the trip was unbearable. Jessica started crying about everything, saying things like, if I really loved her, I wouldn't leave. That 10 days was too long. That she needed me here. I tried to be understanding. I really did, because I thought maybe it was just separation anxiety or something like that. But there was something about the way she said it that made me feel manipulated, though I didn't want to admit it at the time. I felt guilty about leaving, but also frustrated because this wasn't a pleasure trip. It was literally my job, my career, our future together. The day before the flight, which was a Thursday if I remember correctly, I had to pack and prepare everything because my flight left at 11:30 a.m. on Friday. I'd planned to wake up super early, like 5:30 a.m., to get to the airport with plenty of time because it was an international flight and you had to be there like 3 hours early. Jessica had been weird all day, very quiet, barely talking to me, and I was honestly so focused on reviewing my notes and making sure I had everything ready that I didn't pay much attention to her. Then night came, like 10 p.m., and I decided to check all my important documents one last time before going to sleep. Passport, credit cards, flight and hotel confirmations, all that. I went to the drawer of my desk where I always, and when I say always, I mean literally always, kept my passport. I'd put it there like 2 days ago after verifying it was still valid. I opened the drawer, and it wasn't there. At first, I thought maybe I'd moved it without remembering. You know, like when you're sure you put your keys in one place, but it turns out you left them somewhere else, without realizing. I checked all the desk drawers, then my backpack, then my work briefcase, then my suitcase in case I'd already packed it without remembering. Nothing. The passport had disappeared. I started getting nervous. Like really nervous, because without a passport, I couldn't travel, and if I didn't travel, I'd lose this incredible opportunity on my first trip and basically screw up my new position before even starting. I woke Jessica up, who had already gotten into bed, and asked her if she'd seen my passport. She, half asleep, said no. "Why are you asking me?" I explained that I couldn't find it, and she was like, "Well, look for it carefully. It has to be around somewhere," and turned over to keep sleeping. But I was going into total panic mode. I started searching throughout the apartment. I checked completely illogical places like the kitchen, the bathroom, behind the sofa, in the refrigerator, literally. Because when you get that desperate, you search anywhere, no matter how absurd it is. About an hour passed, it was almost midnight, and Jessica got up like annoyed that I was making so much noise searching. She told me to calm down, that I'd surely find it, but in her tone there was something weird, like she was too calm for the situation. Any normal person would be worried if their partner was about to miss an important work trip because they couldn't find their passport. But she just seemed like irritated that I'd woken her up. Then, and I swear this was pure coincidence, I saw Jessica's handbag thrown on the couch. It was one of those big tote bags she used to carry her laptop when she had to work in coffee shops or whatever. Something made me want to check that bag. I don't know what it was. Maybe a hunch, or simply that I'd already checked literally every other place in the apartment. I went over to the bag, and Jessica immediately said, "What are you doing?" "That's my bag." But I'd already opened it, and there it was, my passport, at the bottom of her bag, under her laptop, and some notebooks. I took it out and just stood there looking at it, unable to process what I was seeing, like my brain couldn't connect the fact that my passport was in Jessica's bag with what that meant. I turned to her and said, "Why is my passport in your bag?" And she went pale, completely pale, and started stuttering something about how she didn't know how it had gotten there, that maybe she'd taken it by accident. But I knew. In that moment, I knew with total certainty that she'd taken it on purpose. I asked her directly, "Did you take it? Did you hide my passport so I couldn't travel?" And she started crying, but it wasn't remorseful crying. It was caught in the act crying. You know what I mean? The difference is super clear when you see it. Between sobs, she told me, yes, that she'd taken it because she didn't want me to leave, that 10 days was too long, that if I really loved her, I'd cancel the trip and stay with her. I couldn't believe it. I literally couldn't believe that the person I was going to marry, with whom I'd planned to spend the rest of my life, had done something so selfish and so destructive. I said, "Do you realize what you tried to do? Sabotage my career because you can't be alone for 10 days? She kept crying and saying she was sorry, but that she needed me, that she couldn't be without me for so long, basically trying to make me feel guilty for being angry when she was the one who had done something totally unacceptable. I told her it was over, that I couldn't be with someone capable of doing something like that if she really loved me, she'd want what's best for me, would support my career, not try to destroy it because of her insecurities. Jessica changed completely when I told her that. From crying, she went to being furious. She yelled at me that I was selfish, that I chose work over her, that I'd never really loved her if I could leave her so easily. I was so angry and so tired and so stressed about everything that I just told her to get her stuff and leave, that we'd finish talking after the trip, but that our relationship was over. And then Jessica did something I still find hard to believe. She grabbed my passport from my hands, and before I could react, she tore it in half. She literally ripped it down the middle with a strength I didn't know she had. I stood there paralyzed looking at my destroyed passport on the floor, and she said, "Now you definitely won't be able to go." And she went into the bedroom and locked the door. I picked up the two halves of the passport from the floor and felt like my chest was going to explode from the rage I had. I called Blake. I didn't care that it was like 12:30 a.m. I needed help and I needed to get out of that apartment before I did or said something I'd regret. Blake answered, half asleep, but when I explained what had happened, he told me he was coming right away. While I waited for him to arrive, I searched on Google what to do when your passport gets destroyed, right? Before an international trip, and it turns out you can get an emergency passport. But you had to go to a special government office that opened at 8 a.m., and you needed an appointment and documentation, and it was a whole process. Blake arrived around 1 a.m., helped me get some of my essential things out of the apartment while Jessica was still locked in the room, and I went to sleep at his place. But honestly, I didn't sleep at all. I spent the whole night awake, filling out online forms for the emergency passport, printing documents, looking for any possible way to get them to give me a new passport in time. I managed to schedule an appointment for 8 inches the morning, but there was no guarantee I could get the passport in time for my 11:30 flight. Blake drove me to the government office at 7 a.m. because there was a huge line of people waiting outside. I brought everything: my torn passport, my driver's license, birth certificate, flight confirmation, letter from my employer explaining the urgency, basically any document that proved I needed to travel that same day. The person who helped me was incredibly kind when I explained the situation. Well, the edited version of the situation where I said my passport had been accidentally damaged because I wasn't going to get into all the drama with a government employee. By some miracle, I don't know if it was because they felt sorry for me or because all my documents were in order or just luck. They told me they could issue an emergency passport in about an hour. I waited there like a zombie, drinking coffee after coffee from the hallway machine, sending messages to my boss explaining that I might arrive a bit late to the airport, but that I was definitely going to be on that flight. At 9:30 a.m., 2.5 hours before my flight, I had in my hands a new passport, valid but temporary, until I could process a permanent one later. Blake drove me straight to the airport driving like crazy. We arrived around 10:15 a.m. and I ran through the entire airport with my suitcase. I almost missed the flight, but I was literally the last passenger to board, sweating and out of breath, but there I was. on the plane, on my way to Europe. Once the plane took off and I knew I'd managed to make it despite everything, I started to really process what had happened in the last 12 hours. Jessica had tried to sabotage my career, had destroyed a federal document, because passports are technically government property, and she'd done it all because she couldn't stand me being away for 10 days. The trip was incredible, professionally speaking. The meetings went better than expected. I impressed the clients and my colleague who was training me. My boss was super happy with my performance, but the whole experience was like tainted by what had happened before I left. Every night I talked to Blake on WhatsApp so he could keep me updated on the situation at home. Jessica had been bombarding me with messages, first apologizing, then angry, then apologizing again, a constant cycle of emotional manipulation that I simply ignored. What I didn't know, and Blake told me like on the 4th day of the trip, was that Jessica had started posting on TikTok about the whole situation. But her version of the story was completely different. In her narrative, I was the cruel boyfriend who had canceled our wedding to go on a pleasure trip to Europe, who had broken up with her out of nowhere the night before I left, and who had basically left her homeless because the apartment was mine. She'd made several videos crying, telling her side of the story, and people were massively supporting her, like her videos were going viral. Blake sent me links to the videos and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Jessica had completely edited the story to make herself the victim. She didn't mention at any point that she'd hidden my passport, that she'd destroyed it, none of that. She only talked about how I was a horrible boyfriend, who put work before her, how I'd broken her heart, how she was devastated and didn't know how to move forward. The comments were all supporting her, calling me trash, saying she deserved better, that men only think about ourselves. My social media started filling up with hate messages from people I didn't even know. Jessica's followers who had found my accounts and were attacking me. I had to make everything private and basically disconnect from social media because it was too much. Blake advised me not to respond, not to feed the drama, that when I got back from the trip we could deal with all that appropriately. But it was frustrating to be thousands of miles away watching Jessica destroy my reputation publicly and not be able to do anything about it. When I came back from the trip, after 10 successful days of work, the first thing I did was go to the apartment with Blake and change the locks. Jessica had been going to the apartment during my absence. I guess she still had a key and had left notes everywhere, like apology notes, but also weird notes saying things like, "I'll always be yours," or "You can't leave me like this." It was unsettling, honestly. I talked to a lawyer because I wanted to know what options I had legally. He explained that destroying a passport was technically a federal crime, though difficult to prove it was intentional unless I had evidence. I could also sue her civilly for the costs of the emergency passport and for interfering with my work obligations. I decided to go ahead with the civil lawsuit because I wanted there to be consequences for her actions, not just for her to get away with it and also play victim on social media. My lawyer advised me to document everything, to save all of Jessica's text messages, admitting what she'd done, to take screenshots of her TikTok videos before she deleted them, all that. And he advised me to make a brief public statement explaining my version of the facts, but without getting into drama or attacking Jessica. Personally, just objective facts. I made a short video, like 3 minutes, calmly explaining that I'd broken up with my ex-fiancée because she had intentionally hidden my passport to prevent me from going on a work trip, and that when I confronted her, she destroyed it. I said I respected that she was hurt by the breakup, but that lying publicly and creating a false narrative wasn't acceptable, and that I was taking legal action to recover the costs of the emergency passport and other damages. I didn't insult her. I didn't speak badly of her beyond describing what she did. I just told the facts. The video didn't go as viral as Jessica's, but it was enough for people to start questioning her version of the story. Some of her followers started commenting on her videos, asking her about the passport, why she hadn't mentioned that part, if what I was saying was true. Jessica made another video saying I was lying, that it was all a tactic to make her look bad, but people didn't believe her, as much as before. The narrative was starting to change. Then came the legal process, which was long and tedious but necessary. Jessica had to appear in court, and there she had to admit under oath that yes, she'd taken my passport, and yes, she'd destroyed it. She tried to justify it, saying she was emotionally distraught and didn't think about the consequences, but the judge had no sympathy for that. The court ordered her to pay me the cost of the emergency passport, which was like $500, plus legal expenses, plus an additional amount for damages for interfering with my work obligations. But most importantly, the truth came out officially. The court documents were public, and several of Jessica's followers found them and started sharing them. Her victim narrative completely fell apart. People started commenting on her videos, calling her manipulative, a liar, toxic. She lost thousands of followers in a matter of days. Small brands that had offered her collaborations withdrew their offers. Her entire attempt to gain sympathy and attention backfired on her. Jessica started deleting all her videos about the topic, then made her account private, then basically disappeared from social media completely. Blake told me later, because he still knew people who knew Jessica, that she'd had to move back in with her parents because she couldn't afford the new apartment she'd rented after I kicked her out of mine. That she was super depressed because her entire online reputation was destroyed and brands didn't want to work with her. Part of me felt bad for her, honestly, because even though she did something horrible, no one deserves to have their life fall apart like that publicly. But another part, the part that had been receiving hate messages from strangers for weeks, that had to hire a lawyer, that almost lost an incredible career opportunity, that part felt like it was justice finally. About 3 months passed after all that. I was already established in my new position, had made several more successful trips. My boss was talking about promoting me to an executive position soon. I'd moved to a new apartment, nicer, in a better area of the city. I was rebuilding my life, and honestly, I was better than ever, both professionally and personally. And then one Saturday afternoon, someone knocked on my door. I opened it, and it was Jessica. She looked different, like she'd lost weight, looked tired. She didn't have that air of confidence and superiority she'd always had. She was holding the engagement ring in her hand and told me she'd been going to therapy, that she'd realized how toxic she'd been, that she understood everything she'd done wrong, and if we could try again. I looked at her, standing there in the hallway of my new building, trying to come back into my life after almost destroying it, and I felt absolutely nothing. Not anger, not pity, not residual love, nothing. I told her very calmly that I was glad she was seeking help, but that the thing ended the night she destroyed my passport, that there was no going back from that she needed to move on with her life like I'd moved on with mine. I told her not to look for me again, not to call me, to just leave me alone. Jessica started crying and begging that we at least talk, that she could explain everything, but I closed the door. I heard her on the other side crying for a while. Then she left. I haven't heard anything from her since then. It's been like 3 months since that, and honestly, I hope she's okay, that she's really working on her problems, but far away from me. Sometimes, when I'm on a plane heading to some business meeting in Europe or Asia or wherever, I think about that chaotic night frantically searching for my passport, and how easily everything could have turned out differently. If I hadn't checked that bag, if I hadn't gotten the emergency passport in time, if I'd given in to her manipulation, my career would be stagnant. I'd probably still be trapped in a toxic relationship, and none of the good things that have happened to me since then would have occurred. I guess the lesson, if there is one, is that when someone shows you who they really are, especially in moments of crisis, you have to believe them. The signs were there the whole time, the constant need for attention, the passive-aggressive comments, the inability to support my success if it meant sacrificing some of her time with me. I just didn't want to see them until it was impossible to ignore them. And yes, I lost 3 years of my life and almost lost much more. But in the end, I came out of it better than I went in, with a career I love and without the weight of a relationship that clearly wasn't healthy. My boss is sending me to Tokyo next month for 2 weeks, the most important meeting I've had so far. I already have my new passport, permanent, stored in a safe in my apartment, and this time, no one is going to stop me from taking that flight.